I really do get a kick out of doing tire videos. Let's talk about what it really takes to pick the best adventure tire for what you want it to do. And selecting the best tire is going to go beyond the gap method of tire selection. And the number one question I get from riders coming to do training with me is, what do I want on their motorcycle when they do the training? Should they have a 70-30? Is a 90-10 going to work? Should they have a 50-50? And the simple answer is just doing the gap method, where they look at the contact area versus the gap area, and then they select the tire based on that method. The problem is it can be very misleading. If they go out and they look online and they see a retailer selling a Dunlop Mission as a 50-50 tire, they put it on the bike, they come out, and then they struggle horribly because that tire is not a 50-50 tire. It doesn't have much gap. The rear tire is a 75-25 gap ratio. That is not going to be great performance, which is why we use that gap method. The problem with the gap method is that it doesn't address other factors that can also be very important, such as the depth of that knob, which helps increase the volume of the tire if we're using thrust. It also doesn't address things like, would you be better off with smaller knobs that twist and turn to clear the tread area and give you more bite versus a larger block which may not move and squiggle so much but might give you more stability or more longevity of the tire? And these are all factors that are definitely very important in selecting your ideal adventure tire. Okay, now that we've talked about the way that ratio works, that 70-30, 90-10, 50-50, and that, that gap method is not a bad way to kind of assess the tire. There's three types of traction that we're really looking for when we're looking in adventure tires. And that's going to be friction. That's not something that we get to really see when we go in. But like that Dunlop Mission I mentioned, it's a very hard tire. It doesn't have great stick, but it lasts a really long time. And if you're touring, that's a really important aspect to have on a tire. If I'm going to Argentina, that's not a bad tire to take. But we're going to have the traction. That's going to be the compound of the rubber. The second thing is going to be bite. Now, bite has to do with how many edges we have that can dig in. So just looking at these two tires that I'm just throwing on bikes now, when I look at how many of these different areas can actually grab and pull. And I'm not talking about digging into mud or sand. That's a different equation. I'm just talking about bite. So this is on smooth rock. This is on hard packed gravel, hard packed dirt, on asphalt and pavement. And that's what that grip is. This is where that EOS 7, the Mitas right here, this is where the EOS 7 really is a high performing tire, more than we really give it credit for. It's not a really well-known tire. And unfortunately, after a 150, I went to the EOS 7 Plus, which is a big block. And I'm going to get back to why big blocks and small blocks make a difference. But in this case, the small block with this tight gap means that there's more of these edges at any given time when this tire's touching the ground. That gives more bite. And when we're looking at hard packed dirt, which is very common for us to ride in, when we're looking at the common gravel road, not the deep gravel, but a normal gravel road where it's packed in, when we're looking at shelf rocks, that's where this bite really reigns supreme. And there's been so many situations where I've taken the Mitas EOS 7 and it outperformed the knobbies that I had run at other times. So this is definitely, it has a tremendous amount of bite. So when you think of bite, just think edges. How many places can dig in? Both of the tires that I'm showing here as kind of my comparisons I'm throwing on the bike have what's called a lot of volume, and volume's what we need for thrust. So I mentioned the gap method, and the gap is just contact. It doesn't talk about depth. So if you think about depth, the deeper the tire, the more it can get a hold of and the more it can throw out. And that's the last type of traction we have. So we had friction, bite. The last one is called thrust. And if you think about thrust is when you really don't have a lot of traction to hold on to and you're throwing material to get movement. And this is going to be your really deep sand. This is going to be your really soft dirts where you're really getting a full impression of the tire into that mud or that surface. It's not the most common. We usually actually don't have a lot of thrust environments, certainly not as adventure riders. But that's where the depth comes into play. So what I did on that is I took a measure on each tire and I just measured how deep it was. And to give an example, the deepest tread pattern I found was on the Motas. This was almost 15 millimeters deep on the rear tire. 15 millimeters is tremendous. To give an idea, when I look at the Dunlop, it was less than 10 millimeters. It was actually just slightly over 8 millimeters new. And even some of the other manufacturers I came out with, a great example here was the Metzler, sorry guys, I've got all these prints, but like the Metzler Karoo 4, the Metzler Karoo 4 was only it was less than 9 millimeters deep on the rear. I mean, it really, although it looks like this huge grippy, like knobby tire, it has bite, it has gap, it doesn't have a lot of depth, so it loses volume. In fact, the EO7 that I like so much is 13 millimeters deep. It's the second deepest tread pattern that I found. And that gives it volume as well. So the only place so if we're thinking, okay. Damn guys, I love talking about tires. This is so cool. Okay, so think about it like this. When we get into things like sand is really easy to clear out of tread. So if I want to get into sand, that Mitas, this one here, that has a lot of depth and a 50-50, so it's got pretty good gap in it, but it's got a lot, the sand can get in here and get thrown out. This tire actually works really well in soft sand. It works really well in dusty dirt environments because it can get a full print. It can get that volume. So even though you get a tire that's a 40-60, like the big block, but it's narrow or it's not as deep, this one at 50-50 actually has equal or maybe more volume than those other tires. And that's something that we have to consider if we're looking for that type of thrust. And the same thing, when we're looking at this one, when you get out in my training field and I'm watching riders take off, nothing throws more dirt behind the tires than this one here. And that's because of that depth and that volume. But there's more to this. It's not just about the gap method of 50-50, 90-10. It's not just about the volume. It's not just about the traction. It's also about how the tires move. So you ask me, okay, Brett, you're telling me that a nice deep tire like this Motas here, that this really deep tire is going to give me all that grip, and that's what I'm looking for. Why would a top brand like Metzler or Dunlop choose to go with a shorter knob if that's giving up that volume? And that's because we have to balance, right? When we're talking about adventure bikes here. So adventure bikes, by definition, an adventure bike is already a compromise, right? The goal is that it's supposed to be a lot of fun to work at a lot of things, but there's always something that's better. There's a better bike in the dirt, there's a better bike on the road, there's a better bike for touring, but the adventure bike does it all, and adventure tires are the same. When we get those really thick, tall knobs, that's more room for it to move and shift. That's also why you'll see that many of the bikes now have these big, massive block knobs for your adventure bikes, because a larger block means it's a more stable surface. It makes the bike handle better on the street. It doesn't feel as wobbly. Yeah, you're still riding through the gap on it, but it doesn't shift around, where when you get a small knob, like the Anarchy Wild, if I make these knobs really, really tall and thick like Motas does on theirs, this thing's going to be squirrely on the pavement because it's tall and it can leverage and move all over. So by making shorter knobs, I make the tire feel better on pavement. That's part of the compromise. So one thing is I can make the knob shorter. The other thing I can do is I can make those knobs larger, because it turns out knobbies are pretty sticky on the road. They may not feel as stable, but they have a ton of traction, way more than we give them credit for. They just don't feel as good because they squirm and move around. So when you're looking for that tire, when you're trying to make a choice, you really have to be honest with yourself and say, what do I want that tire to do for me? And if your goal is, I need that tire to last me for a commute, for a long trip, then something like that Mission that's a really hard rubber, that doesn't have a lot of gap in it, that might be the right choice. And let's be honest, if you're riding on dry dirt roads and summertime BDRs, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a perfectly fine option. But if you're going to go out and do single track riding and try to take your adventure bike out and ride it like a dual sport or a dirt bike, well, then that's not going to be your solution, right? You need something that has more volume, more grip, more bite that can get into those surfaces. We have to be honest with ourselves about what we want that tire to do for us. Now, bite is great. And the more I have those small knobs where I can get more bite, that's a great thing. But if I want it to feel really stable and I want to carve the corners on the way there, then I'm going to be giving up some of that stability. I'm also, those gaps and changes in the way they're designed make a difference on the noise. And so there's a lot of other factors that go into this tire selection. So do you want bite? Do you need volume for thrust? Do you want it to handle well on the street? Do you want it to last long, or does that not matter to you? And if you're riding the weekends, it's not a big deal. You can take it down, you can get a new tire, you can change it out. If you're on tour, that's a bigger deal. So yes, 50-50, 90-10, all this stuff makes a difference, but what is that tire going to do for you? Let me get back to that first question. So I open this up saying the number one question I get, or at least, I would actually say the number one question I get about tires is, what should I put on my bike when I come out and do training? Well, when you're going to come out and train with me, my goal is to make sure that you get the most out of the time and money you put into that investment, which means I want a tire that's going to allow you more room to make errors without penalty. If you spend your day picking up a motorcycle, rather than being able to make mistakes, recover, and learn from that, that's going to be a disadvantage. So my general, without asking you all the questions that go around this, my general answer is going to be get the most aggressive tire that you can afford and that you can live with, after you put it on the bike. Because during the training, you want to have the best tools to get the most out of it. So in that particular situation, the same goes true as if you're a brand new rider, then you want a more aggressive tire. If you're going to be off-road, you want to have that room to make air without penalty. Once you really understand yourself, when you understand the motorcycle, then you can start going, all right, I'm going to go with a less aggressive tire because you can compensate for that with skill and knowledge and experience. That's the answer when it comes to what tire to run on the bike. And I have a whole list of tires online on ones I recommend. And I'm definitely going to continue to enhance my website, Tkacs.com, with more information on things like printing and volume and recommendations. And again, so to kind of give you a notice, when I look at things like the Dunlop Raid, again, we're looking at a rear tire that's under 8 millimeters deep, new, with the Mission not being much better. It's closer to 10 on the rear, which means it has a little more depth. That gives it more volume. And all the way up to the Motors, it's going to be up to 15. So a lot of difference in depth, a lot of difference in different types of tread. Again, tighter blocks are going to give you more room for bite. It's going to give you good volume and softer surfaces. But when you get in mud where it's sticky, it may be more likely to pack. And so having the bigger gaps and bigger openings may allow more clearing. Of course, guys, I'm telling you, I told you we love talking about tires. Those smaller knobs also twist and turn more, and that may also help clear that tread. So there's a lot going on here. A couple other things to keep in mind before I let you guys go. I did an entire video on just choosing tire size, and that's a video all to its own. Just putting the factory size back on the bike is not always the correct answer, and there's some sizing considerations from brand to brand. So keep that in mind as we go on that. Also, speed ratings and load ratings make a difference. Pay attention to that speed rating. I just talked to a rider yesterday who had a crash riding over 100 miles an hour, had a crash at that speed riding on tires that were not designed for that. So that's something to keep in mind. Gap depth, compound, cords, bite, lots of different things to consider here. Guys, I know I got a little all around at the end of this video. It's just such an exciting topic to chat about. If you'd like me to come back around and focus on any one of these elements in more detail and maybe a focused video on that, just let me know about that. I do plan to come back and talk about tire pressure again. I did a video a while back talking about how tire pressure affects contact patch if you're talking about riding on soft surfaces, but I have not gotten into tire pressure specifically. I think that's a video all to its own. Hey guys, thanks for watching the channel. Thanks for all your support through Patreon and through the thank yous on the channel. Thank you for keeping this channel free of advertising inside. I've been able to say no to other sponsors to make sure that you know the information I'm sharing with you is pure and uninfluenced by outside factors. Remember, smile while you ride because attitude matters.